Hello class. In this lesson we're going to go over the central books of the Republic, the central sections of the Republic, 6 and 7. And in these we get what is at the heart of the idea of the Republic. So it's no mistake that Plato put them in the very middle. They're really the central idea of the whole book. And that is the examination of the good, or the idea of the good, the look of the good, as our translator puts it. And Socrates approaches this indirectly. He says, I can't tell you what the good is itself, but I can only give you the second best thing, which is the offspring of the good, he says. And the word offspring is it's kind of a play on words because it means both child, offspring, but it also means interest. So when you charge interest on something, it kind of has an offspring, right? It kind of has a child, which is the interest that it earns or that it incurs. So he says, I will pay only the interest and not the full sum. And they kind of make a joke about that as well. And so Socrates is giving us an indirect approach to the good. And so at first he does start to say what he thinks the good is. He says, I think that the good is the greatest learnable thing. It is something which is necessary for there to be any knowledge whatsoever. This probably sounds weird. Why do we need the good, this abstract idea, in order to have any knowledge of anything? Well, he kind of gives us a hint at this. He says, if you're going to acquire goods, useful things, you have to know what they're good for, what they're useful for. So in order to know anything or have anything, so you have an object, you know what the use of that object is, or else you wouldn't have it, right? So in order to have and know what things are, you need to know what the good is. So that's the initial way in which he frames the idea of the good. But just to hit on a few of the features of the way in which he's going to describe this, we see this theme coming back of the torch race, or inheritance. So what we're getting is an offspring of the good, something which the good produces. And he's going to give it in three distinct images, we'll call them. So we have the allegory of the sun, which is a kind of image insofar as it's something used as an example that points to something else beyond it. So we start with the analogy of the sun, then we get this divided line, and then the allegory of the cave finally at the end. And each one of these images is like one of the segments of the race on the horseback. So we're getting one thing here, and then it's getting passed along, and it's part of a second leg of the race, and then passed on again. And we also get this idea of inheritance or succession. So each segment is building off the previous one, just as you hand down an inheritance from one generation to the next, and each one is intended to build on the previous ones. So these are the ideas that came about in the first book of the Republic that we saw, and now they're all kind of coming together in this moment, which everything else had been sort of building towards. And that's the idea that I really want for you to capture from this, is this idea of a progression from image to image to image to image. And you don't just accumulate these things and then give them back, but instead, when they come together, they give something completely else beyond them, and that's an insight. So instead of just knowing this image, that image, that image, the images come together, and what we're left with in the end is no images at all, just an insight into the internal makeup of it, the inner nature of the idea. So that's what Socrates is trying to do here. He gives us this sun analogy, then the divided line, and then the allegory of the cave. And each one of these on its own is insufficient to explain the good. But each one gives us something. And once we've grasped them all, we see beyond them into an insight in which they all sort of converge into one idea. And so this way in which the images he's giving us work together to form one core insight is really what the idea of the good is for Plato, and what Socrates is, what Plato is having Socrates say here. And this goes back to a age-old question in philosophy in ancient Greece: what is the relationship between the one and the many? And this is the central problem of ideas. And so there's this way of talking about Plato's philosophy as him having a doctrine of ideas, or that Platonic ideas is kind of the core philosophical idea of Plato. I don't want to go too much into that because there's a lot of problems with that line of interpretation. But what I want to get at here is the way in which ideas relate to the problem of the one and the many. And so the basic idea, the basic notion behind this is that you have one idea like horse or human, and you have many instantiations of that. So there can be an unlimited number of people or horses. And so the things that we perceive directly can be many, and yet they have one form which underlies them all: human or tree or horse or whatever it is. And so the way in which many things can be understood in terms of the unity of a form that is above and beyond them, that's really the central problem, metaphysically, you might say, going on here. And a lot of times people will talk about this idea of the forms in Plato in a very simplistic way, and it's just there's this ideal form of humanity, and it exists in a intelligible realm beyond, and somehow it comes down and forms things in the world. That's not what I'm going to have you thinking about here. There's a lot of problems with that theory, and Plato himself in other dialogues will refute it on many different grounds. And so let's not worry too much about that idea, but the one and the many here has a much more concrete meaning. So when you have a good, something towards which you aim, an end, a goal, let's say it is getting into shape. You want to be exercising, eating good food, getting a lot of sleep. So what you have is many things that you do that all converge and aim at one end or one goal. And so here we have many things and one unifying thread of them. And that's the idea of the one and the many that is going to come up here. And this idea of progression. So you progress through a multiplicity of things, and it all comes together into one final goal, which in this case is the insight or the intuition, the intellectual intuition, apprehending the idea of the good. So in this progression, we have the development of this analogy. So we start with the analogy of the sun, and then we go to the divided line, and then finally the cave, and each one of these builds off the prior one. So let's just go through these really quickly. I've provided you with a few videos that will explain these in detail, so I'm not going to go through that detail. So please watch those before this so you have a sense of what each of these is. But so he starts with the analogy of the sun, and he says that the sun is like the good. So that's the analogy. The good is to everything as the sun is to the physical world. So what does the sun do? It's a source of generation and growth. It gives heat and light, and it illuminates things. And the multiplicity of things that we see and interact with in nature are all many individual things, but they all have one source, and that is the sun. So the sun is this single thing which illuminates and provides a source of generation and growth for all things. And yeah, he also gives this, Socrates also gives this idea that there are many beautiful things. So we can go around and see all of these different beautiful things, but in each case, what we're experiencing is beauty itself. Beauty does not change from one case to the other, although the things appear completely differently. So analogously to that, the beautiful and the good have this property in common, that we might have many things that are good and good in completely different ways, but they all participate or share in a goodness which is common to them all, or else they wouldn't actually be good. And so here we really get this idea of the one and the many, the way that many things are unified into one, and this idea of generation and growth. Then the last thing I should mention here, again, is the idea of illumination and light. So the sun provides illumination for vision. So you have visible objects, and you have the faculty of vision, the eyeball and the body capable of seeing, but there's something else which is needed. You can't just have these two. You need light. So light is a third thing beyond them, which provides them a source which illuminates them. And so the good is going to be like that. It's going to be something which comes into the process and provides that process with the necessary illumination. And also with the idea of illumination, we start to see how Socrates is casting the good as something which makes things appear. So in our interaction with the world, things are illuminated or made visible or appear to us because of their goodness, because they have a use, because we can interact with them in a way that's beneficial to us. And so the good is providing us with all of these aspects. So then Socrates moves from the analogy of the sun to the divided line, and we get a reinterpretation, you could say, of the problem of the good. So he gives us one interpretation and then moves on and gives us a new one. And something is going to be retained from the previous one, but also something new is going to be given, developing it further. So in the divided line, we're asked to divide this line up into segments, and then each of the segments is made to correspond to a realm of existence in reality. And so the first two major sections cut up, the upper two parts and the lower two parts, are the intelligible realm at the top and the visible realm at the bottom. So you can think of this as the realm of bodies and nature versus intellect and soul. So that's the way it's first divided, and then each one is divided again. And what we get here is an analogical structure. So this section is to this section as this section is to this section. And that means the likenesses and shadows are to the things seen as thinking, processes of thinking and mathematics are to the intuitions of the principles of things. So that's the analogy. Shadows are to things seen as thinking is to principles. So what's the relationship there? Well, a shadow or a likeness being like a reflection in a mirror. So shadows and reflections are to the things seen means, you know, you have an object and then you have its shadow. So the shadow is something that comes from the real thing but is less real than it. So shadows are to things seen as mathematics and thinking are to principles. So what are principles? Well, principles must be the real thing from which our process of thinking is like the shadow or the reflection of the thing. And so you can think about this in the following way. Like, you have a book and you have all of the perspectives that you can look at it from, all the different angles. That would be like the likenesses or shadows. All of these different views on the thing, which there are an infinite number of. I can look at this from an infinite number of different perspectives. But the thing itself, the book, is not exhausted in any one of those single views on it. And no object is presented to you fully in a shadow or in the way it appears in a mirror. There's something beyond every single one of those, which is the thing itself. And so this goes along with mathematical thinking in the following way. So you can think about an infinite number of triangles because we can form an infinite number of triangles, right? We have equilateral right triangles, acute triangles, etc. There's all these different shapes that a triangle can take. But a shape with three sides whose angles add up to 180 degrees that's a principle. That's something that we grasp intuitively. So we know what a triangle is without having to think of any particular triangle. And when you know that it is this shape that is generated by having three sides and inner angles equal to two right angles, knowing that principle allows you to know every property of every single triangle. So mathematical thinking, when we do demonstrations and we deal with individual triangles, that's only possible if we have this higher form of knowledge, which is the intuition of the principle which creates triangles. And so that's what Plato really means by forms. Forms are these ideas that generate things, like the generating of a triangle in that way. So here we get this hierarchy of knowledge, and we get this is to that as this is to that. So intuition is to thinking as things seen are to likenesses. And so on this stage in our development of the analogy, what we're getting is an explanation of how the good can be a form of knowledge. So the good is something where we relate a multiplicity of things to a unity, just as triangles to the intuition of the triangle, or the multiplicity of appearances of things in the world to the actual objects that we see. And we also get an idea of interdependence. So the good is something which unifies things in such a way that the parts are able to be interdependent on each other. And this relates to the idea of means and ends. So by means of thinking about a multiplicity of different things, be it the properties of individual triangles or by moving around an object and seeing it from all of its multiple different perspectives. By means of those, we can approach the end or the goal, which is the thing itself, having knowledge of the thing, or in mathematics, to have knowledge of the principles of things. So the multiplicity of appearances and of demonstrations and thinking through many different things, those all come together in the end, in the goal, which is the thinking of the unity of the thing, or the idea of the thing. So that's the second stage in this development of the idea of analogy here. The third stage is the cave, and this is extremely complicated, little story that Plato gives us, and I'm not going to go through it here since there are videos that have described it. But what it shows us is a progress, a way in which someone develops from ignorance to coming to knowledge. And so this kind of retrospectively recasts everything that he said before. So we have this divided line which tells us about the different forms of knowledge, and we have this idea that there's this good that illuminates and gives a power of generation and growth to things. Well, now we're seeing that actual progress take place. So the previous two images were very static. They just gave us a kind of snapshot of the way things are. These are the kinds of knowledge there are. This is the good, and it doesn't change. Now on this stage we have development, we have growth, culmination, right? There's a progress, and someone comes out of the cave at the end and comes into knowledge and has an insight. And what the cave really gives us is this idea of focalization, focalizing or converging. All of these ideas are coming together. So I have this little squiggle, what are those called? Spiral. And so at the first bend there we have the sun, and then the next one we have the divided line, and then finally the cave. So it's kind of spiraling into itself and gathering together. So the idea of the good here is that the good is a continuous progress, and it involves a kind of horse race or succession of images. So appearance, 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 appearance. And none of these will be sufficient to explain the good. None of them, and it's not just that we put them together and suddenly we have the idea. No, the images converge into an insight, and the insight is different from them altogether. And that's what the divided line shows, these segments that are separate from each other and yet continuous, right? One continuous line, but broken into separate segments. So we move across the continuity of this line and come in the end to bring it all together into a single insight. What is the good? How are things oriented towards ends and towards a kind of growth, which that focalizing makes possible, right? So when we grasp the underlying meaning of all of these images, it's that ability for them to come together which allows it to grow and to generate an insight and an intuition. The idea of ratio and proportion is important here. So we saw that in the divided line, but later philosophers will talk about this a lot, that intuition is one of the best examples of how to understand intuition is that of ratios and proportions. So I'm just going to give you a brief idea of this. You have a ratio of 1 to 2. And this ratio 1 to 2 is the same as 2 to 4 or 3 to 6. And it's also the same as having two glasses of water, one that's twice as much as the other one, right? And you can make this ratio appear in an infinite number of different ways. It could be sizes, it could be shapes, it could be numbers, and even among numbers, there's an infinite number of different pairs that you could choose that show the ratio of 1 to 2. So here we have an infinite number of different ways in which this proportion is able to be instantiated. And we can calculate to determine if we have that ratio or not. But what intuition does is we're no longer calculating to see if we have that ratio, but we're immediately able to apprehend or to have the insight that the ratio is present. And in the same way, the good is immediately apprehended in that way. So we see a certain instance in which there's a good, and immediately we grasp that the same proportion, the same ratio, the same relationship exists between means and ends, or between many and one. And so that's what the intuition of the good is. All knowledge involves some way of having things come together, converge from many into one. And therefore, all knowledge involves the good in this way. And that's really the central insight that Plato's getting at here. And earlier on, at some point, Socrates is explaining something to someone and they're not understanding it. And he says, well, grasp the idea as a whole in the right way, and it will appear very evident to you, and the things said about it before won't seem strange. So this really encapsulates what he's talking about. So we've said all these things about what is justice, or what is, any number of these philosophical questions, and without having grasped how they fit together in a whole, without having that insight into their unity, it will just be all of these images, all of these shadows, and we won't be able to make sense of them. We won't see what draws them together. What we need is a grasp of the idea as a whole, and to grasp it in the right way. And then everything will no longer seem strange about it. So the same thing could be said with these three images. What is this line? Why are these things being said about the sun? What is this cave? Well, once you've grasped what unifies them, then it doesn't seem strange anymore. It seems like, oh yeah, all of those parts fit together in the idea of the good. So philosophy asks certain questions in this presentation by Plato, and these are the questions that sort of revolve around the idea of the good. So philosophy asks, what is the difference between nature and art? And this question comes up over and over again in Plato and in Aristotle later, as we'll see. And this really boils down to the question of what is the good. So this is just kind of reflecting why this is such an important passage. So nature is something which acts towards an end. This is what the Greeks thought. Fire goes up, like it burns and moves upward. Therefore, it's like acting towards something. It's striving to go upward, and rocks go downward. Animals grow and they mature. They work towards, they progress towards maturity. A seed turns into a tree. It strives to be a tree. So nature acts towards ends. It's a kind of striving towards the good. Art does the same thing in a way. Art acts towards an end. You try and bring something into existence. A house builder builds a house, or a painter produces the likenesses of things, or an artist produces beauty, right? The artist brings something into existence. Now, these aren't going to be exactly the same. Art and nature are not exactly the same. One is artificial, the other one's natural, right? But what unifies them is this idea of poesis, or making. This is related to the word poetry, poiesis in Greek. It means to create or to produce, and so it's something that is halfway between nature and art. It's a phenomenon of life, but I mean, so is art insofar as it's a living thing who creates art, right? But the thing created is not a living thing. So you make a bed or a house, that's not a living thing, but someone who makes it is a living thing. So this idea of making, the good is directly related to a process of production or of generation or creation. And so everything that exists had to be made or is in the process of being made, and therefore everything that exists is related to the good. And that's really encapsulates the idea for Plato, the idea of the good. Another closely related problem to this that philosophy asks because of this central focus of the idea of the good is, what is the difference between the nature and the intellect? And we saw this in the divided line. The divided line is the relation between an intelligible realm and the natural world, right? So what is this relationship? Philosophy asks this question, especially Platonic philosophy. The nature of the intellect is explained as the intuition of the idea of the good. So all intellect is analogous to this idea of the good. So that means it's a convergence, it's a unity of a multiplicity, all of these things that we just talked about. So the good is not understood in terms of exchange or interest or debt, which is something we've obviously been talking about a lot, and which was the central idea of Book 1 of the Republic, is justice, giving what is due to others. Is justice what is in the interest of the stronger? These questions, remember? Here we do get this ironic playfulness on the part of Socrates, where he says, I can only give you the interest on the good. I cannot give you the good itself, right? I can only become in debt to you in my process of trying to tell you the good. And this really gets at Socrates' role as a teacher. So Socrates is trying to teach you to approach the good. He cannot hand it to you. You can't hand someone knowledge. You can show them the way to approach it for themselves. And that's what kind of solves this problem. So Socrates is a friend, right? Because he tries to benefit those he talks to. And in this process of benefiting them, he gives them what is due to them, right? He says this. But it's not an exchange. He doesn't expect someone give him back what he gave to them. He does what is within his power to those who are within need. So the good is this kind of benefit, this growth, learning, teaching. And it's also explained in terms of the unity of consciousness itself. So the way in which multiplicity comes together in the unity of the intellectual intuition mirrors directly the way that benefiting and growth happen. So that's how we have a kind of convergence of these aspects of the good. The good is something that benefits. The good is what provides growth and generation. And the good is that unifying act of consciousness or the soul. And all of these things come together in Plato's presentation of the idea of the good. And now just to kind of take a step back and look at the whole Republic that we've read so far. The idea of the good is meant to explain what all education and learning strives for, and justice also strives for the good. Socrates says all these things. So to take it back to the larger analogy at work in the Republic, we're talking about what is justice, and Socrates needs to explain this by looking at the city. So what is a just city? That will tell us what a just person is. And more or less the idea we get is that justice in a city means a healthy constitution, right? That's what republic means. Politeia is a constitution. And we can talk about the constitution of the body. And what we need is a healthy constituted body, and we need a healthy constituted city. So the parts of this composite whole need to be harmonious. And each of the parts, he says, needs to mind its own business, right? The heart needs to do one thing, and it can't interfere with what the lungs do. They both need to do their own role, and if they mess up what the other part is doing, it cannot be a constitution. It cannot be a healthy constitution. So analogously, in a city, everyone is supposed to do their jobs and not interfere with other people's jobs in order for it to be healthy, right? So that was the idea that we got in books 2 and 3 of what is a good city. Well, we encountered a problem with this, which is that the philosopher is someone who meddles in other people's business, that the philosopher is learning from others, right? So Socrates is a busybody. He's constantly bothering people and trying to prove to them that they're ignorant. So what Socrates lays down actually ends up disrupting the entire constitution that he thought, or he pretended at least, to have laid down as an immutable principle, right? So, as we saw in the Apology, Socrates is going around and bothering everyone, and so they put him to death, right? Socrates is so far from fitting into this good city. And one of the ideas there is that, well, when is Socrates actually necessary? Socrates is necessary for a sick, feverish city, right? Athens is... all they want is colonial power. They want to expand their empire. And you have all these people who are greedy like Thrasymachus. It's a city that is sick and feverish, right? In which a philosopher is needed. So it's because the city is already not a good city that Socrates is required. And even when we get Socrates... just city being developed through the introduction of these guardians, and we get this kind of what he calls the Callipolis, which is the beautiful city. It's the job of the guardians to become involved in the lives of their citizens. So how can it be that the parts of the body just do their own work and don't interfere with each other, if the ruling part of the body is necessarily getting involved with all the other parts of the body? So these are the problems that arise in this way of presenting the city. And Socrates himself is the one pointing out these problems. And what we get with this whole mess that I've just gone through here, that's probably somewhat hard to follow, with Socrates saying these things and then, 100 pages later showing us what's wrong with them. Well, that exact progress, that process of dialectic, of cross-examining an argument, what we call the Socratic method, that is the good that Socrates is ultimately working towards. It's a good that is a process of education. Education is not something simple in which you just hand someone pieces of information and they just take it and then they have it. No, it's a progress that requires effort and requires understanding why a certain thing is wrong. And the only way to understand that something is wrong is to first think about it on its own terms and then go into it and find what's wrong with the idea. And that's the process of dialectic. And so this is exemplified in the cave in a way. So the person doesn't just get up and leave the cave. They have to be dragged out of the cave. And this dragging is exactly what dialectic is. And Socrates says in Book 1 of the Republic, I had this whole argument with Thrasymachus, and he disagreed with everything that I said, but then finally he blushes, realizing that he was wrong. And it was this difficult process that required me dragging him. He says dragging there. So we get this idea of dragging someone through dialectic. You know, you don't willingly question your presuppositions on things, and it requires someone like Socrates to come along and meddle in other people's business. He doesn't mind his own business. He's a busybody. He comes and interrupts their business. So that's that whole idea that Socrates is presenting us with here. And it requires us look beyond what is immediately given. We have to look to the underlying meaning behind it. And that really reflects how the multiplicity of images come together in a single insight, right? One last thing to mention, back on this idea of music, because that's has such an important role in the Republic. Music is so helpful in thinking about this because modes or melodies, songs have a mode or a melodic pattern to it, expresses emotions and intentions, and has a very unified sound to it, right? The creative effort is an effort to be sad or serious or inspiring or soothing or making you want to dance or whatever it does. It plays a multiplicity of notes and different chords, and it changes rhythm and things like that. So it's constantly fluctuating and varying. And yet all of those fluctuations and variations come together and they express a unified intention or effort or emotion, right? And so music really gives us an insight into how things are able to do this gathering and converging, how different sounds, which are in the visible realm, all these shadows almost, can come together and express an underlying idea behind them all. And so the way in which music is able to instill music is able to come together and instill a emotion or a mood to it. And likewise, education of character is meant to produce a unified character in which someone wills the same things. They will justice. They desire to learn and to progress and become better people. So in the same way that music can kind of focus our attention, there needs to be a kind of music of the philosophical disposition. And this is something that Socrates kind of poetically hints at all the time through the Republic. That we need a kind of education of our character that's a musical education, but also that philosophy itself will be this kind of unified orchestration in which all of these parts of our character come together to form our directedness towards the